Grief is such a complex subject. It really is, and everyone goes through the grieving process differently. But one of the things I wanted to talk about today is, do we ever fully recover from losing a loved one? Do we ever fully recover from losing a best friend or a best pet or something like a job we loved? When we're in the stage of grief, do we ever fully recover? And I think that there's been a lot of misnomers and miscommunication over the last number of centuries about grief. For years we've been taught that grief is all about sadness, all about loss. You're never going to be able to replace that person. That part of it is true. But we have learned over the years in our grief recovery program that what we've been conditioned by society is not necessarily true. As a matter of fact, a lot of the conditions by society actually elongate the struggle with grief and create more chaos and drama that is necessary. In our work, what we allow people to do is to feel in the beginning, right? It's like, oh my gosh, you've got to vent, you've got to feel that what we term in the beginning. Now, remember, I keep saying the word in the beginning. What we term in the beginning to be sadness and loss and pain and all of that is necessary to get to the next level. But the next level is a completely different form of grief recovery. And so, can you completely recover for life? I don't think that we ever completely recover, but what we do is we transmute the sadness, the loneliness. Now, if we're in a program, one of the greatest mistakes, and I'm going to do a little PSA here. One of the greatest mistakes people make is when they have that extreme period of grief, that trigger, the loss of someone, the loss of a job, the loss of a pet, is that we go into isolation or we go heavily into addiction of watching more TV or drinking more or eating more or whatever. And the very first step really needs to reach out to a professional, whether it's a priest, a rabbi, a minister, excuse me, a counselor, a coach, a therapist, it doesn't matter. When you are hit with something big, with grief, none of us have been trained how to deal with it, and most of us are just taking what society says, and society is way off these days in regards to what we know about the grief process. So going back to what I was saying, we need to look at this grief in the beginning as it is sadness and it is loss and it is pain. And so we need to do writing exercises and we need to minimize it in that way by dealing with it, right? But then we start to educate our clients on something that is so crucial to understand that will allow the grieving process to be transmuted into something so much more beautiful, so much more acceptable, so much more incredible. And that is, we start to explain that the tears of a grieving person are tears of love. There's no way in the world you could be saddened and have the depth of tears you have if you didn't love that person, that pet, that job, that whatever it was that your heart and soul was fully into, 100% into. So we introduce through our program this slow way of transmuting the pain and loneliness and maybe even anger at God for taking your loved one. And we transmute that into understanding. We transmute that into self-compassion. Like, yes, I understand my pain is so deep because I loved that individual so much. And you see, now we bring logic into the grieving process. Now, highly sensitive people, which there is a millions of them in the United States and all over the world, we take them on a slightly different journey and we elongate the journey because of their extreme sensitivity, their emotional response to stress, trauma, etc., may be different than the average person. So we look at each individual, but the bottom line is this. As we move through this whole grieving process, we look for signs that our loved one is still communicating with us, which I can explain what that is. It's absolutely beautiful. And then we start to remember that when we have a tear, 2 years down the road or 15 years down the road, that something triggers us, a picture, a memory, a comment by someone, and we have tears. And we have to continue to remind ourselves, God, I love that person so much. These tears are just filled with love. As many of you know, I've lost my mom and dad in the last 3 years or so. I was outrageously tight with my mother. I became much closer to my father as I aged. And it was hell on earth for me for the first really year. The first 10 months was the worst 10 months I've ever experienced in life. And then at the end of the year, things started to shift and, amazing things happened. And now, yes, I still will have tears and I still can get choked up thinking about my mom or dad. But then I always remember, David, you could never go there 3 years later if it wasn't because you completely love them at a level deeper than you may have even realized when they're alive. Let's think about this. Let's shift the conversation around grief. Will it ever go away? No, but we can transmute it into amazing memories and beautiful thoughts and maybe play their favorite music 20 years after they've passed and dance by yourself thinking about how brilliant it was to have that person or that dog or that whatever it was in your life, okay? This is David Essel with The Mental Cleanse. We have 5 free books at the website talkdavid.com. And remember this, when you cleanse your mind, you cleanse your life. Have an incredible day.